In the year 30 AD, within the sun-drenched landscape of Judea, a pregnancy was never a solitary experience. It was a communal event that vibrated through the limestone walls of the family courtyard. For a young woman in a village like Nazareth, the news of a new life began not with a test, but with a profound change in her essence. She recognized a shifting in her spirit. She felt a deep weight in her limbs that the elders called the blessing of the earth. This was the first whisper of a child taking root in the sanctuary of her womb. It was a journey governed by ancient laws and the quiet wisdom of the hearth. The announcement was a sacred ritual. She would first go to her mother to share the news in a low, reverent whisper. The response was an immediate prayer of gratitude toward the heavens. In this ancient culture, a child was the anchor of the lineage, ensuring the family's survival and honor. A child represented the continuation of the covenant and the security of the family's plot of land. The expectant mother was immediately placed under a protective mantle of protection. She was no longer just a daughter. She was the guardian of the future. The entire household adjusted its rhythm to support the fruit of the hearth. The first physical trial was the morning sickness, known as the waves of the sea. In 30 AD, the sensory world was intense. The smell of cooking fires became a sharp enemy to her senses. There were no modern remedies to soothe her churning stomach. She relied on the logic of the earth. Her grandmother would bring her small pieces of unleavened barley bread before she even stood up from her mat. She was encouraged to chew on dried mint leaves to settle the internal storm. Every woman in the house helped her manage these difficult, weary hours. Somnolence was viewed as a divine requirement rather than a sign of laziness. When the Judean sun reached its peak, the mother-to-be was commanded to rest. Her family prepared a cool corner of the stone house. It was believed that in sleep, the mother's peace directly sculpted the soul of the child. This was her primary duty for the growth of the lineage. This period of internal quiet was a time for the woman to guard her mind. She was encouraged to avoid anger, loud voices, or any form of social conflict. The elders believed that a mother's emotions were the silent architects of the child's temperament. She spent her hours of rest in a state of prayerful meditation, focusing on the rhythmic pulse of the life within. Her dietary habits were transformed into a communal management project. The law of the table ensured she received the highest quality of the harvest. She was fed sweet figs, dried dates, and olives cured in the finest salt. These were the cravings of the desert. These foods were thought to strengthen the blood for the coming labor. She strictly avoided anything bitter or excessively sour. The village wisdom suggested that such flavors could darken the child's spirit. She was given fresh pomegranates and honey from the mountain hives. This management of her nutrition was a way for the neighbors to show their support, bringing small gifts of food to her doorstep. The sensory environment of the home was also managed with care. The family would burn small amounts of sweet resin or dried herbs like hyssop to keep the air pure. This olfactory shield helped the woman manage her sensitive stomach. Every scent and every flavor was curated to ensure the peace of the womb. The home became a sanctuary. If you are moved by the ancient traditions that shape the families of the past, please leave a like and subscribe to Journey Through History with us. As the middle of the pregnancy arrived, the woman moved deeper into the circle of the veiled. In the year 30 AD, the worlds of men and women were distinct in matters of birth. Pregnancy was the absolute domain of the female. She spent her days in the company of her mother and sisters, creating a fortress of shared wisdom. This was a space of absolute safety. They gathered under the shade of the ancient olive trees during the heat of the afternoon. This was a site of mechanical preparation. They spent hours spinning raw wool into fine thread and weaving the first swaddle. These were long strips of clean linen used to bind the infant tightly after the birth. This tradition ensured straight and strong limbs. The management of her physical comfort was a primary focus for the group. As the desert air was dry and harsh, her mother would rub her skin with pure olive oil. Often, this oil was scented with myrrh. This scented armor prevented the skin from cracking and served as a ritual of anointing the vessel. She was being prepared for a sacred transformation. The midwife's eye was the only form of surveillance available. This woman was the guardian of the threshold. She used her own hands to feel the position of the child. She looked for the glow of the countenance, believing a radiant face was a sign of health and a strong spirit. She was the ultimate judge of the unseen development. If the expectant mother felt a languor of the spirit, the midwife would prescribe a specific walk at dawn. The morning air was thought to contain a vital breath to invigorate both mother and child. This was the architecture of care, built on the observation of nature and memory. There was no room for fear in this circle. Every discomfort had a remedy. The grandmother told stories of the great matriarchs like Sarah and Rachel. These stories were tools of resilience. They instilled in the young woman a sense of ancestral strength. She was taught that she was part of a long chain of life. Her individual struggle was part of a larger narrative. The home was being prepared to receive a heavenly guest. The geography of the home also changed. The family prepared a specific area for the birth in the most private part of the stone house. They cleaned the floors with water and vinegar and laid down fresh straw and sheepskins. Every item was purified according to strict customs. The home became a temple. The management of the environment was a task for all. The mother-to-be was taught the songs of the hearth. These were rhythmic chants used during labor to manage the rhythm of the body. They were songs of the harvest, connecting the birth to the fertility of the land. The management of her mental state was just as important as her physical health. She learned to breathe with the natural wind. The cravings for specific foods were met with communal effort. If she desired fish or specific mountain herbs, the men would go to great lengths to find them. Satisfying these desires was a way to quench the thirst of the child. The entire village conspired to keep the peace of the expectant. No conflict was allowed to reach her ears or heart. As the final weeks approached, the woman entered a state of grateful vigilance. She watched the moon cycles with the midwife, calculating the days until the hour of the threshold. The noise of the world began to fade, replaced by the focus on the internal countdown. She was a soldier preparing for an ancient and personal battle. The midwife prepared her bag of comfort. It contained dried herbs for tea and the oil of transition. The family lived in a state of ordered readiness. The water jars were kept full, and the lamps were filled with the best oil. They knew that the hour of the threshold would likely come in the middle of the night. Every woman in the house waited. The young woman felt the weight of her responsibility. Her body was a site of intense management, but also of profound respect. She was treated as a queen of the hearth. In 30 AD, there was no higher honor than to bring forth a soul to continue the ancient walk of their people. She was the bridge between generations. Her strength was the strength of all. The hour of the threshold almost always arrived under the cover of darkness. When the first signs began, the atmosphere of the house changed instantly. The men retreated to the courtyard or the village square. The interior of the stone house became a sovereign female space, lit by the flickering glow of small oil lamps and the red embers of the hearth. The midwife arrived as the navigator of the storm. She brought the wisdom of the hands. She would first wash her arms in water scented with hyssop. She prayed for the guidance of the matriarchs. The room was filled with the scent of burning resin and the saltiness of the Judean night wind. This was the moment of transition. The management of pain in 30 AD was a communal effort. The laboring woman was never left alone. She was supported by the pillars of the house, her mother and sisters. They sat behind her, allowing her to lean against their bodies. They created a human chair of strength. They breathed with her, matching her rhythm in a dance of endurance. There was no anesthesia in the year 30 AD. Relief came from the strength of the spirit and the logic of the earth. The midwife encouraged the mother to move or to squat. They believed gravity was a partner in the birth. Stasis was avoided. The body had to remain in motion to find its way through the fire. The woman was an active participant. When the pain reached its peak, the women began the shield of sound. They sang the psalms of the shepherds and the songs of the ancestors. Their voices were a barricade against fear. The mother's cries were met with a louder, more rhythmic song. This auditory management kept her mind focused on the goal. She was anchored by those she trusted. The midwife used warm compresses of mountain herbs to soothe the mother's back. She used the oil of transition to rub the woman's abdomen. Every woman in the room felt the echo of her own past labors. This was the sisterhood of the threshold, a bond that transcended social rank. They were united by the shared burden of life. The sanctity of the room was strictly enforced. No one was allowed to enter who had not themselves experienced the fire of birth. The midwife watched the signs of the earth, knowing exactly when to urge the mother forward. She was the conductor of this biological orchestra, guiding the mother through the waves toward the new life. The struggle was seen as a sacred labor. The pain was not a punishment, but the price of the soul. The mother was encouraged to offer the effort to the heavens. This mental framing transformed the physical agony into a spiritual journey. Every woman present contributed her strength. The room was a site of energy management and focus. As the child drew near, the midwife prepared the first basin. This was filled with warm water and a small amount of salt. The logic of the desert dictated that salt would toughen the child's skin. The tension in the room reached a crescendo of silence. Every woman held her breath as the miracle unfolded. They were witnesses to continuity. The cry of the new dawn finally broke the silence. The midwife caught the child with experienced hands. The relief was a physical wave that washed over everyone. The child was immediately washed and rubbed with oil. This was the arrival of the anchor, the fulfillment of months of patient, weary waiting and ancient prayers. The child was then wrapped tightly in the swaddling cloths. This swaddling ritual was the first act of external order. The mother was given a cup of sweet wine mixed with honey to restore her vital heat. She had crossed the threshold and returned as a matriarch of the house. Her status was forever changed. She was now a guardian of life. The midwife then called out to the men in the courtyard. The news was greeted with the shout of the village. The management of the event was now a public celebration. But inside the room, the women remained in a quiet triumph. They had managed the transition from shadows into the light. They had protected the secret through the long night. Following the birth, the mother entered a period of sacred separation. In the year 30 AD, this was a time of transition that lasted 40 days for a son. During this time, the woman was exempt from every communal duty. She did not grind grain, and she did not go to the market. Her world was the sanctuary of the house. She was in a state of holy recovery. This was the season of the mat. Her world was the quiet interior of the stone house. The management of her recovery was the priority of her female relatives. They created a shield of silence around her. This was a gift of time. It allowed her body to heal and her spirit to adjust to motherhood. She was being nurtured just as much as the child. Her dietary management reached its peak during this period. She was fed strength foods, lentil stews and barley cakes soaked in oil. Her sisters brought her water from the deepest part of the well to keep her cool. The goal was to replenish the milk of life. Her nutrition was the foundation of the child's early strength. Somnolence was her primary occupation. She and the child lived in a rhythm of the moon, sleeping through the heat. The noise of the world was kept at the door. Neighbors would leave gifts of grain at the entrance, but they would not disturb her. This was the respect of the survivor. Her peace was guarded as if it were a treasure. The grandmother would sit by the mat, managing the education of the mother. She taught her the art of the cradle, how to interpret the cries of the infant. This was the oral library being passed down. The mother was learning the logic of the heart from the women who mastered it. She was becoming the new librarian of the family's love. The architecture of the nursery was simple. The child slept in a small wooden cradle lined with soft wool. The mother kept the child close at all times. The bond of the flesh was never broken. This intense proximity was the primary way they managed the infant's security. In 30 AD, the mother was the child's entire world. She was the source. The enjus of the early months were now a distant memory, replaced by the joy of the fulfillment. The mother felt a new authority of the hearth. She was treated with a level of deference she had never known. She had proven her resilience and returned with the future in her arms. She was now a pillar of the village, a link in the chain. The management of the child's health was a constant vigil. They used the wisdom of the herbs to treat any minor ailments. A small amount of honey on the tongue or a rub of olive oil was the only medicine. They relied on the ordered calm of the home to keep the child's spirit strong. The peace of the mother was the child's best defense. Do you have a tradition or a story passed down in your family about the birth of a child? Share your legacy in the comments below. This sacred rest was also a time of refinement of the spirit. The mother reflected on the life she brought forth. She was the gardener of a new soul. Her internal world was vital for growth. The scent of the sanctuary was one of clean linens and Judean herbs. The house was a temple of growth. The mother spent her days in grateful passivity, allowing her body to heal the battle scars. Every woman who visited brought a story of her own sacred rest, reinforcing the communal nature. She was never truly alone in her recovery. As the 40 days drew to a close, the mother prepared for her return to the light. She washed her hair in water scented with hyssop. This was the restoration of the social self. She had moved through the valley of transition and was ready to reclaim her place. She was no longer a girl. She was a creator and a guardian of the promise. This period was the foundation of her future authority. She had earned her place in the circle of the elders. The management of her recovery was a success. She was a link in the eternal chain, a guardian of the promise made to her ancestors. She was the bridge to the future. Her rest was a holy act that ensured the strength of the next generation. The final act of the journey was the presentation of the child. The family traveled to the local synagogue. The mother carried the child, now strong and alert. They offered a sacrifice of gratitude, usually a pair of turtle doves. This was the public seal on the private journey. It was the moment the child became part of the national identity. The child was officially named and recognized as a member of the covenant. This was the arrival of the social soul. The management of the memory began on this very day. The details of the pregnancy, the cravings and the enjus were added to the family's oral history. The mother was now the librarian of the heart. She was the keeper. She would tell these stories to the child as they grew, ensuring they knew the price of their life. The child's identity was rooted in the struggle of the mother. This narrative management was how values were passed down. The child was taught they were the result of a sacred labor. Every life was a miracle that required communal strength. The legacy of these ancient mothers is one of incredible resilience. They lived in a world of physical hardship, yet they managed to create a sanctuary of love. They did not have modern medicine, but they had the sisterhood. Their logic of the earth sustained the life of the people. They were the silent engineers of history. The cycle of the hearth was eternal. One day, the young mother would become the grandmother. She would pass down the same secrets of the midwife and the songs of the hearth. This endless loop of care was the true power of the village. It was a world governed by order and love. They were the weavers of the social fabric. The somnolence of those afternoons and the morning sickness were the small prices paid for the continuity of the line. The mother looked at her child and saw the future. She had managed the threshold and won. Her authority was now absolute. She was the heart of the home. She turned a stone house into a temple of the spirit. Thank you for traveling back to 30 AD with us. By understanding the intimate struggles, we honor the human condition. The light of the ancient lamp still shines in our modern world. We see their courage in every new life brought into the world. They remind us that the management of the family is the most sacred task of all. The management of the family remains the most sacred task. The ancient mothers showed us that even in a world of stone, one can build a kingdom of the heart. They were the engineers of survival. Their story is a reminder that the power of the sisterhood is a universal truth. They held the future in their arms with profound courage. The door of the stone house closes, the child sleeps, and the story of life continues. The Judean hills are silent, but the song of the hearth echoes through the ages. We honor the sacred labor of those who came before us, knowing that we are the keepers of their flame today. The past is never dead. It lives in the breath of every child. The logic of the earth remains our guide. We learn from the past to manage the present. The ancient mothers of 30 AD were the pioneers of the soul. They traded their ease for the future. Their life was a symbolic performance of faith. They were the architects of the human spirit, teaching us that love and order survive time. We see their faces in the glow of the countenance of every new mother. Their victory is our victory. The cycle of the hearth is the heartbeat of humanity. We find the private moment in the quiet rooms of Nazareth. The sentinel of history is at rest, and the story is told. They were the queens of the ordinary, turning bread into life. The final bow has been taken, and the curtain of time has fallen. The ancient villages are ruins, but the noise of the heart remains. The mothers of 30 AD are at peace. They moved from a life of sacred labor to stone. Their love was the quiet miracle. They were the most famous couples, hidden in the splendor of duty. Their architecture of love was built on tradition. They taught us that order is the first law. The management of the home was a spiritual duty. They saw the divine in the ordinary, a bowl of stew, a clean swaddle, a whispered prayer. These were the tools of their sacred governance. They were the true rulers of the Judean village. The economics of the heart is a ledger of sacrifice. They gave up their bodies so the lineage could flourish. This altruism is the foundation of civilization. They understood that intimacy must be guarded against the public gaze. They lived in the secret garden of the family, protecting the spark of life from the cold world. The acoustics of the past are filled with their voices. We hear the rhythm of the loom and the breath of the labor. They are calling us to remember the weight of the heritage. They are the silent sentinels. We honor them by telling their story with respect. They were the most watched couples, but their hearts were private. As the lamps of Judea are extinguished, the light of the mother remains. She is the eternal candle. The management of the pregnancy was just the beginning. She would watch the child grow, teaching them the path. She was the first witness to the future and the resilience. She was the bridge that led them across time. The logic of the midwife is the logic of life itself. Wait, breathe, and push when the time is right. They lived by this rhythm. They were masters of the moment. They did not rush the work of the heavens. They knew quality takes time. They were the keepers of the pace. Their patience was their power, a steady force. The visual audit of the home showed order and beauty. They decorated the walls and kept the floors swept. This aesthetics of the hearth was a reflection of their internal order. They lived in a sanctuary. They were the architects, creating a world where life could grow strong. They turned dust into glory and silence into song. In the end, the mother of 30 AD was the victory of the lineage. She stood at the center of the world, holding the child toward the sun. Her journey was complete, and her legacy was secure. The story of her labor is the epic of the hearth, a song that will never cease. She was the most powerful person, for she held the future. The Judean hills glow in the twilight. The song of the hearth is carried on the wind. The management of the soul is a success. We leave the stone house with grateful peace. The mothers shown us the way. The sentinel of history closes the book, but the heart beats on. The story is a monument to love, a rebellion against time.